Good morning once again, and if you're just joining in, you're watching Sunrise at Sea. My name is Kira Natozo, and today we have a special guest, one of our own, and that is Counsel Gawaya Tugule. Yeah, he's a veteran, he's a counsel, he's a lawyer, and he's a call away every time when we reach out. And joining me in studio is Counsel. Good morning, sir.
Good morning, Kira. Happy to be here.
Thank you for honoring the invitation.
Anytime.
Yes. And to kick it off with, because of time, to kick it off, I would want to ask you, in your perspective, because we're going to be discussing the corruption toll in regards to the health sector. Yeah. And I want to ask you, in your perspective, to what extent do you think corruption has actually contributed or had an impact to the health sector?
Corruption is the reason the present government exists. It's the reason it still is in power. So it permeates every aspect of life in the country.
Yeah.
And it dictates the dynamics politically and economically in the country. And I think the worst bit is that it has also come to dictate the social dynamics as well. We're basically corrupt through and through, and that is very disconcerting. I would say that if you're talking about health, we have a very poor health system. These days, it wasn't always like that, by the way. By the time the British left the country in 1962, Uganda was at a level of development that was not very, very high. But you see, in life, what matters is not where you were per se, but where you're going. And at that time, we had a very positive outlook. The way the British set up the country was such that we had systems and structures. We had a health system, we had an education system, we had a political system. There is a way things were supposed to work. And when the blacks took over, then things began to go wrong. Initially, I think Dr. Apollo Milton Obote, I think, did well in terms of maintaining what the British had left in terms of the health systems, everything that the British left. Obote worked within them and maintained them and built on them. Yeah. I think that's the thing that was there at the time. His was not a perfect government, but the philosophy that underpinned governmental action was such that let's maintain what has been the standard that has been set and just build on it incrementally. I think there was a slight interruption for 8 years during the Idi Amin era, and that meant that things were not as they should be politically, because he scrapped parliament, he scrapped basically democratic governance. Yeah. And so we had rule by decree. And but even then, the amazing thing was that the systems, actually the health system remained, education system remained, the transport system also remained. That was the amazing thing about Idi Amin. He made all these blunders, the killings and everything, but
everything remained.
Everything remained as Obote had left it. I think the problem began in 1986 when these guys came in, Mr. Museveni and his team. That is when we saw now whatever the British had built was just messed up because they had no idea how to run government. And they had their own assumptions, they had their weaknesses, which they have never admitted. Yeah. But I, who has been here for quite some time, I was born in 1971, we have watched a gradual decline of the health system. Like a steady decline. Now, you may argue about health centers and everything, which I'm like, if we had maintained the system that the British had left and just built on it systematically, we'd have a much better health system. But there's been so much corruption, so much incompetence, that right now we have no health system to talk about. Yeah. So you have a great chance to stay alive longer in this country if you have the money, if you have the political power and the connections that are attendant to it. Without that, like the Baganda say, okay salucha.
Okay salucha.
Okay salucha. As in, when you're drunk, like you have no more chance than a drunken cockerel, like they say. In other words, a drunkard, every time he comes home, he's top here, and then he sees, the loose chicken lying around. So where's my let me eat it now. Now he's very unpredictable. He might say, let me eat it now or tomorrow. Like at any time, it might go. Yeah. That's why the Baganda say, okay, Salucha, like you count one day at a time.
One day at a time.
Yes, one day at a time, because you're not sure about tomorrow. like the cockerel of a drunkard.
Okay, now I would want to ask, in regards still to the health sector, do you think, why do you think there is actually corruption in the health sector?
Why?
Yes, why?
No. I told you, corruption is the reason this government exists. And that to me is the biggest problem, because when we dissect corruption, we usually talk about two broad types of corruption. There is the petty and bureaucratic corruption, which you call the corruption of need. A traffic policeman on the road sees you don't have a license, stops you, checks you, and then but he's also hungry because he gets about 300,000 shillings a month. But he's got children to feed.
Yeah.
He's got children to educate, to take to have healthcare done for. So he's going to ask you, say, I mean, what do you have? Can you talk like a Ugandan? You know what I'm saying? Like, can you talk like a Ugandan? And if you give him 5,000, 10,000 shillings, he'll let you go. Maximum 20,000. The traffic policemen don't take more than that, ideally. Now, that's corruption of need.
Yeah.
Because there is a need. You are in need because you don't have a license, or your third party expired, so you need to get moving.
Yeah.
But also, he needs some money for his lunch. He probably has no money in his pocket. So it's like, if I can just give me 10,000, you go. Just go. I mean, you haven't killed anybody. This is nothing serious. Just go. That's corruption of need. And it's really, it's about people being poor and they just need to make ends meet.
Yeah.
Then there's corruption of greed, which we also call which we call grand corruption. Corruption of greed. It's not because you don't have, but it's because you are never satisfied. And that kind of corruption just keeps on going on and on and on. And that's where we see billions and billions being stolen. And that's why Betty Kame, the IGG, Inspector General of Government, has estimated that about 10 trillion Uganda shillings is lost every year to corruption. Now that's more than a quarter of our national budget per year. It means that Ugandans only get maybe about 70%, not more than 70% of their budget going, because the other one is cut off ab initio. I mean, if there is 40 trillion this year, you know at least 10 is off. Yeah. So you work within 70, and then you lose that to inefficiency and this and that, and that's a big problem. So grand corruption then becomes the biggest problem, because you feel the pinch. You feel, I mean, you go to hospital, there is no medicine. Why? Medicine has been stolen. Over the years, we've seen a steady record of money for the health sector being stolen. We saw last year and this year the COVID monies. Where are they? These are, we're talking about billions and billions. We get loans, we get grants, we get our own money from the consolidated fund. It's all taken by the powers that be. And you can't do anything about it. You really cannot do anything about it, because they're the guys in power. They have the guns. They have everything on their side working for them. So you cannot do anything about it as an ordinary citizen, except talk about it like we're doing now. But they steal all this money with impunity, because they know we can do really nothing meaningful, because they have the guns. So that is where the issue is, that grand corruption has affected the health sector to the point that we're no longer relying on the health sector. You basically treat yourself and your children. If you rely on what government has put in place, you're going to die.
Very true.
Yes.
Now, you talked about we have different agencies. We have IGG trying to make sure we put all this in place. And I'm sure there's so many inquiries, you know, where is the money? You know, people want accountability for all this. So do you think, are there any inquiries that have actually yielded any good feedback in regards to corruption? Because I know it's not just corruption, but is the health sector missing also something?
You see, paradoxically, Uganda has one of the best anti-corruption legal regimes, police and legal regimes in the world. On paper, we look at, we have a policy against corruption. Several of them have been changing over the years. We have a national anti-corruption strategy in place. And if you look at it, it's very well crafted, beautifully crafted. I mean, It's one for the record books. If you look at our anti-corruption legislation, we have we have very, very strong laws, and the current Anti-Corruption Act is very, very comprehensive. Even if it were not there, the penal code itself deals with corruption as the penal code, and this has been there for like decades, even before I was born. So we have very good anti-corruption legislation. We have an anti-corruption court that is in Kololo. We have, so basically the High Court has a whole anti-corruption division, which caters for the Magistrates Court, that's for the smaller cases, and the High Court for the bigger cases. We have agencies. We have well-coordinated agencies that are supposed to fight corruption. We have a Ministry of Ethics and Integrity,
yes,
which is basically the nerve center that coordinates the anti-corruption fight. Ethics and integrity is actually attached to the office of the president. It's incidentally. I mean, that's the paradox that, you know, beats me. Ethics and integrity is actually, it began as a desk in the president's office, elevated to the department, then became a fully fledged ministry. It has a permanent secretary. I mean, it's a full ministry. Its brief is to fight corruption. That's its core mandate, to fight corruption, to infuse ethics and integrity and mainstream them into our day-to-day living. That is the purpose of this ministry. So you've got very comprehensive infrastructure in terms of fighting corruption. You have, and the Ministry of Ethics and Integrity then has, it connects the coalition. There's not a coalition, but there is I'm getting the right nomenclature for it. But there is, it coordinates the agencies that fight corruption. The Justice, Law and Order sector answer to it, and then all these. If you look at the police, if you look at the police, if you look at the prisons, if you look at the judiciary, and the Inspectorate of Government, all these are coordinated by the Ministry of Ethics and Integrity. So we have a well-coordinated, just like you see this table here, that you have different whatevers, but there's where they come together in the fight against corruption. So in terms of policy and legal framework, we have 100%, actually 120% if you like. The problem comes in the actual implementation, and that is our biggest weakness. All these things we talk about, we have them on paper. In terms of implementation, it becomes very, very difficult, because then you have the grand corruption without which this government cannot exist will be undermined if this framework is allowed to thrive or to function, to have its core mandate. I should have added who's this girl, this Lieutenant Colonel Edith Nakalema. Yes, who is State House Anti-Corruption Unit. Yeah. So you see, we have so many agencies. The legality of Nakalema's unit, I think, needs to be discussed at another forum. But it shows that the president, at least on the face of things, is anxious to fight corruption.
Very true.
It seems that he is committed, he's concerned.
Yeah.
Yes, he thinks corruption is a bad idea, and then it should be fought. So he sets up all these things. I think if you talk about the anti-corruption fight, on paper, Mr. Museveni will get 150%. If it comes to implementing his own strategies that have his signature and blessing, then even a 0 would be too much for him. Because then anybody who fights corruption ultimately is fighting the Museveni administration directly. Anybody who tries to enforce these laws is actually touching Mr. Museveni where it hurts most. Anybody who says, let's be efficient in fighting corruption, is trying to say, we don't want Mr. Museveni in power. Now, that is the contradiction that Uganda is faced with. Yeah. That on one hand, you have a president who seems to be really eager to fight corruption. Last year, he had, was it last year or the other year? The anti-corruption walk. 2019, yes. And we had a group of young people who said, no. We do not think that Mr. Museveni has any will to fight corruption. Let us do our own anti-corruption walk. So they said, we are doing the real anti-corruption walk in Kampala. We want to demonstrate against corruption. We want to show that corruption is not enough is being done against corruption. What happened? They arrested them. So we have about 16 activists all arrested. They're in Uganda Road Court. I'm one of their lawyers, and what was their problem? They were demonstrating against corruption. Now, what kind of government is that? You jail people. Actually, they were jailed, as a matter of fact. Or they were running for some time. We had to get them out of jail. The case is still ongoing. It is staggering along. But my issue is, young people are saying we don't like corruption. They're demonstrating, and the police comes out with all their guns to arrest them, beat them up, and throw them in jail. That is Uganda for you. That is the Museveni administration that we're looking at as anxious to fight corruption. That is how they fight corruption.
Now, Doctor, in your perspective, as we wrap this up, because we don't have enough time on our side, how do you think we can fight this fight of corruption, mostly in the health sectors? We've actually seen doctors going on strike because they're not being paid enough. COVID donations, money was allocated for COVID, yeah? But we're not seeing any results being yielded.
You will not
out
see
of
any
this.
results.
So, in your perspective, what do you think the government needs to do?
If you're waiting for results, you're going to wait a long, long time. You'll gray like myself before you see any results, my dear girl. So what was the question? Sorry, I interrupted.
What can we do? Yes, I know we're going to wait for a very, very long time. Yeah.
Yes.
But what do you think some of the things we as individuals, because the president is emphasizing that we need to take a stand in this as well.
Let me tell you, the most urgent and the most meaningful solution in the anti-corruption fight is to change the government.
That's your solution?
That's the #1 solution. Anybody who thinks corruption should go should help. Yes, I mean, you're lying yourself if Museveni is still the president, and I say that with all my heart, with a clear conscience. You want corruption out? Throw Museveni out. There'll be no corruption. It's as simple as that. That's the first and foremost. Anything else that you do, we shall be just going around in circles and getting nowhere.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much, Council. It's been great. And like you had from the Council himself, we need to change the government. Well, that's all I had for you here on Sunrise at Sea with the Twitter Jobs Part 2. However, you don't want to miss, as Sandra will be showing you some of those milkshakes. Good morning.